بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. We're continuing inshallah with our study of the 12th chapter of the Quran, which is Surah Yusuf. This is a beautiful surah, a surah that is one of the few linear chapters in the Quran where the story goes from start to finish. Throughout the rest of the Quran, the stories of prophets are told in scattered places and junctures in the Quran. So you'll find a little bit about the Prophet Moses in the first part of the Quran, first juz, and then you'll find some in the 16th, you'll find it in the 20th, you'll find it in different places. The story of the Prophet Yusuf is an entire chapter, and it's very linear, which is why it's a very popular chapter for many people to read. But one of the main reasons why we're reading it is to reflect on the deeper lessons contained in his story as a story of trials and tribulations that seem to never end. We've reached verse 43, and we've just noticed how every single time the Prophet Joseph goes through something, and you think, okay, fine, now things will get better. And it's like, nope, something else comes up. Okay, now after this, for sure, God's help will come and life will become great. Nope, it gets difficult. And there's betrayal, and there's letdowns. And there's a really deep lesson here for all of us to think about. The Prophet Joseph, we don't see him anywhere in the chapter despair. We don't see him give up and say, you know what? Ya Allah, for how long? Why is it that sometimes we do that? Allah sends a test our way. So what do? We say, you know what? I've been hearing all these lectures and these halaqas about, patience. I'm going to be patient. So we start trying to be very patient. We're like, I won't object to God's decree and his decision. I'm going to stay firm on this. But let's be honest for a moment. Let's be honest. Sometimes we observe what we might call conditional patience. We're patient, but in our own minds, there's this hidden, suggested condition that we are making with God, which is like this. It's like, oh Allah, I'm going to be patient now like you asked of me. I'm going to do what you've commanded me to do. But oh Allah, at the end of it, I want you to give me what I want. Do you understand this? We don't say it sometimes, but there's this condition that's kind of just, in the background. Oh Allah, I'm going to be patient. It could be, oh Allah, I'm going to stay away from that sin. And there's this kind of assumption or expectation that after this test passes, this trial ends, I expect you, God, to do what I want. Because I did what you wanted. I was patient. I stayed away from the sin. So now I want you to do what I want. And imagine you get through that test, and lo and behold, you got another test. It's like, how's that fair? Allah, I did what you wanted, and you give me another test? Do you see the issue? This can be a deception from the devil and a real insidious way of us trying to maintain control over our affairs in life. And we're not truly submitting to Allah. True submission to Allah is what? Oh Allah, I'm pleased with whatever you decree. Not, I'm pleased so long as you please me. True submission. And I want to give you an example from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Those of us who've read his biography, we know one of the most, major incidents in his life was the 1 year known as the year of sorrow, where he lost his wife Khadija And then he lost his uncle, Abu Talib. I want you to think about, that uncle Abu Talib. Imagine the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, throughout his life, he's constantly hoping and wishing that his uncle would accept Islam. So he's always kind of trying to show him the beauty and truth of Islam, present it to him. And every time his uncle rejects and refuses. What might one of us think in that situation? You know what? I'm just going to keep inviting, and eventually my efforts will pay off, right? Almost like, oh Allah, I've been grinding, trying to get this person to be Muslim for decades now. At the end of it all, my efforts can't go in vain, right? After all these years, Ya Allah, surely my efforts have to pay off. And with the Prophet Muhammad, what happens? Do we get a happily ever after story? I think sometimes, the cartoons we grew up watching and the movies, they conditioned us to expect happily ever after in situations in life. Seriously. Y'all ever watched a show where you never got too upset because you knew that the main character could never die? It's going to have to turn out good. It takes away from it. You're kind of like, yeah, I know it looks like their life's in danger, but they're not going to die. There's still 2 hours left. There's still 3 seasons left. Right? And you know that the producers would not end it on such a terrible note where we're just oh, that's the end of it? Everyone died? We're programmed, conditioned to expect happily ever after. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, his uncle passed away without Islam. After all the effort, after all his sacrifice. What are we reminded? And then God reveals in the Quran to him, you don't guide whomsoever you will, but God guides whom He wills. The same thing. In life, we can be patient, and we can hope for better. But to come from a place of entitlement, from a place of bargaining, God, I've been good. Accept all my patience and all my this and that. Now give me what I want. That's entitlement. And a sign that we were coming from entitlement and expectation is that if we don't get what we want, we turn our backs on Allah. We become resentful. You ever seen that? It's conditional. God, I'm going to start praying. I'm going to start doing what you want. But there's a subtle, I expect you to give me what I want. And after repeated efforts, and if I don't get what I want, yeah, I'm done with this whole prayer thing. It doesn't even make a difference. You didn't get me what I wanted. That's not how we interact with our Lord. The Prophet Yusuf is repeatedly let down. The last thing that we read, where he got let down, was what? He helped these 2 men who were, fellow prisoners. He gave them an interpretation of their dream. Each of them had a dream, and one of them, who he knew would survive, he told him that, listen, when you get out of prison, you're going to end up in the court of the king, and you're going to be pouring wine for him. So when you get there, mention me in the presence of your master. Just mention, hey, there's this man, an innocent man, Yusuf, he's just rotting away in prison. You should, be just and get him out. Allah Ta'ala says, but the devil made him forget to mention Joseph to his master. And so Joseph remained in prison for several years. Some scholars say several years refers to 12 years. Others say it's about 7 years. That's incredible. Let's go with 7 for the sake of, lower number. Because 12 is, subhanAllah. Let's just go with 7, the more conservative number. Can you imagine you told someone to do you a favor and they didn't do it for 7 years? That's incredible. The scholars, there's an interesting reflection here. Throughout the story of the Prophet Yusuf, never once do we see him asking anyone other than God for help. At every instance, when he finds himself in the well, he turns to God. When he finds himself about to be seduced, he turns to Allah. When he's in prison, he turns to Allah. He invites to Allah. At everything, he turns to Allah. This is the first instance where he turns to a human being and says, hey, when you get out of prison, help me out. Just do me a favor. I helped you. I interpreted a dream for you. So please remember me. And the one time he asked a human being, the human being forgot him. And so some have reflected on this point and said, the day that you entrust your affairs to human beings, you leave yourself subject to human flaws and imperfections. That's why we're encouraged to always first turn to God. Because you can turn to people, but you have to remember that people can let you down. And all of us have experienced this at some point in our lives, being let down. Or we can engage in idealizing of people. This is very common. You ever heard the idea of don't meet your heroes? And the idea is you meet them and you're like, well, they're not actually that nice. They're not even like that great. They're very normal people. Almost like we wanted them to be greater. Humans are humans. They're going to have their flaws. Allah is the one who, when a person turns to Him, will never let His servant down. That involves submission, to accept what He decrees and not what I want or you want. But subhanAllah, the devil makes this man forget to mention Joseph, and so he remains in prison for several years. Now, how does the Prophet Yusuf get out of prison? Again, his trust in Allah never waned. He knew he was there because this was part of Allah's divine plan. And so his trust was, the day will come where Allah will get me out. How did Allah get him out? Through a dream. How did he end up in the prison? How did this whole journey start? With a dream. And now, as he's in the prison, the king has a dream. Allah Ta'ala mentions, وَقَالَ الْمَلِكِ إِنِّي أَرَى سَبْعَ بَقَرَاتٍ سِمَانٍ يَأْكُلُهُنَّ سَبْعٌ عِجَافٌ وَسَبْعَ سُنبُلَاتٍ خُضْرٍ وَأُخْرَى يَابِسَاتٍ. That one day the king said, I dreamt of 7 fat cows eaten up by 7 skinny ones, and 7 green ears of grain and 7 others dry. I mean, this is a very confusing dream at face value. And so this king, though, he's very intrigued by this dream, clearly. Because he gathers the people around him. And he tells them, Ya ayyuhal mala, O chiefs, aftuni fi ru'yaya. Tell me about the meaning of my dream. In kuntum lirru'ya ta'aburun, if you can interpret dreams. If he didn't think it was important, he wouldn't have asked them, right? If he just thought it was like a random dream. Y'all ever have random dreams? This is always fascinating. How many of you dream very vividly? Show of hands. How many of you don't remember ever having dreams? And the rest of you, what do y'all do? We don't sleep, right? We drink your chai here and then we're just awake the whole night. It's really fascinating. I mean, the research suggests that everyone dreams. That everybody dreams. It's not a question of whether you dream or not. It's more a matter of just how much do you remember, right? And how aware are you of your own dreams? Regardless, this king, he felt it was important. So he gathers all these people and he says, tell me the meaning of this dream. SubhanAllah, it's so important in life to surround yourself with the right people. It's so important in life to surround yourself with the right people. Who are the right people? How do you know if you have the right people around you? Yeah. The ones that bring you closer to Allah. That's the Sunday school answer. Yeah. What's another way to look at it? Yeah. They'll tell you the truth and not what you want to hear. How do you know if that's the case? Because people can gaslight you and you're like, are they telling me the truth? Right? So how do you know that? But no, I get where you're coming from though. They have the courage and they have the willingness to say what needs to be said, even if they know it might make you upset. Beautiful. Yeah. What's another?
Like, I think one is when you're with them and then like reflecting back how you act in those scenarios. Because when you're by yourself, you kind of have this idealized version of yourself, and then you go to see someone, and if how you act in that scenario isn't good, it's probably telling you something about that particular group.
Okay, so the assumption I guess we're making is that if you're behaving poorly around them, that they're the influence. Okay, that could be the case. Or maybe they're all good people, but like you joined them and they all just, I'm just joking. I'm totally joking. No, I get what you're saying though, right? It's how do you end up behaving? It's a good measure, yeah. Okay, people that make you reflect and see life for what it actually is, beautiful. What else? No one has said the V word yet. What's the V word? People whose values align with yours. Do you understand that? The right people to have around you are those whose values align with yours, or they have the values that you seek to embody and live by. Does that make sense? A lot of our friendships have a lot of friction, especially as we start to try to grow, because values begin to collide. Initially, values were aligned. It was just chill, relax, have a good time, right? But as you get older, and now you're moving in a certain direction, and they're moving in a different direction, you're going to notice repeated friction. Repeated, not like once. Over, it seems like every time now. All the things you guys used to do together, suddenly now you can't even do them together anymore. Every time you try to do them, there's friction. And that's likely because your value systems have shifted. And it's hard. It's very difficult. Because on the one hand, you want to live according to your values. You feel in alignment. You feel like you're being yourself. You don't have to be someone you're not. But then you also don't want to turn your back on your friends. And if you turn against them, it's very lonely. Does that make sense? It's tough. It's undeniably tough. But again, that's why it's so important to frequent spaces where the people in that space align with your values. Because while they're not your friends yet, the fact that they have the values that you want to embody should drive you to try to establish friendships with them. And it makes your journey all the less lonely and all the less difficult, all the more enjoyable. And that's a big goal of ours here at Wijhah, is to offer a space for people who want to get close to Allah, want to grow from wherever they are. You know, people are at different stages and phases in their spiritual journey. All of us. But the goal, I think, hopefully for all of us is, but I do want to get closer to Allah. I do want to get more clarity on the purpose of my life. What does it mean to live a meaningful life? What does it mean to not just be alive, but to live? Just to use an expression of Henry David Thoreau, right? To really live life. Not merely be surviving day to day. Not be the same person that I was 1 year ago. How did a whole year pass by? 12 months? I'm still the same person. The scholars of the past, one of them, he said, every day that passes in which I don't increase in my knowledge is a day wasted. That's how they used to think about time. The time was not meant to simply, just pass. People talk about the expression of killing time. It's like, no, time will kill you. As time goes on, you will die. And before you die, make something worthwhile of your life. There's something important that you need to, that's why God created you. That's why He directed His divine attention towards you. That you're that important to Him. That He brought you into existence. It's for something, right? The king surrounded himself with people, unfortunately, that were a little arrogant. And it's very clear because he uses the word ru'yaya, like my dream. And they don't use the word ru'yaya, they use ahlam. And the two are a little bit different. They said, no, these are just confused visions, meaning you're just seeing things that are completely meaningless. Like maybe you had too much food to eat last night. Like there's nothing to your dream. And they said, you know what? We don't even know the interpretation of such useless dreams. We know the rest of the story, right? Inshallah, most of us know how the story proceeds. Eventually, the Prophet Yusuf gives an interpretation, which means what? What do we know from that then? That the dream was meaningful. Well, what was the issue? These people didn't know the interpretation, and they didn't have the decency to say they didn't know. So rather than say, you know what, King, it's a great question, we just don't know. This is beyond us. They were condescending. And they trivialized his dream. Do you get that? This is such an important point. The scholars of the past would say, to say la adri is half of knowledge. La adri in Arabic means to say I don't know. To say I don't know is considered half of knowledge. How? How is not knowing knowledge? Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. And even more like preliminary to that, you know what you don't know, which is known as conscious incompetence. Like you're aware of what your limits are. That's a form of knowledge. The ability to say, you know what, like, no, I can't really talk about that because I just don't know enough. Right? Now, when something's as obvious as genocide, there's no excuse for I can't talk about that. You know what I'm saying? Like that's probably the exception. But in terms of expertise, right? To say, you know what, I don't know. I'm not really sure about that. Let's ask someone who's actually, trained in that field. And what's the reason why we can't say I don't know? Yeah. Our ego. Well, tell me more about that. I don't know what that is. I'm joking. I know very well what that is. But yeah, tell me about it. Right. So if I say like I don't know, my ego now is worried that what? I'm not the one in control, and people will look at me and go what? Oh, like forget about this guy. Doesn't even know that. Doesn't even know that. And that's why we have to be careful not to ever belittle someone not knowing something. Because when you do that, you discourage people from learning. Right? You discourage people from learning. I think one of the most empowering and profound attitudes to have in life is to say, I don't know something, but I'm ready to learn it. I don't trust that I know something necessarily, but I'm willing to learn it. If you have that, subhanAllah, you can go so far in life. When I was studying, my mentality always used to be what? Because sometimes you'd read a book and it'd be really difficult to understand. Like you're trying to understand what the author said. And I used to challenge myself and go, if a human could write this, I could definitely understand it. Like it can't be beyond me. How is it that there's a human who wrote this? He didn't just know it. He wrote it out. Surely at some level I can understand this. So then it's just a matter of, let me ask some people for help. Let me look for commentaries. Let me try to figure out a way to understand this. So I want to tell you a story about the great Al-Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala. It's a very well-known story about him. That a man traveled from very far. Some say it's Spain, some say it's more North Africa, Morocco, Algeria area, all the way to Medina. And it wasn't like Saudi Airlines, right? It was camel, horse, It's talking about months here. It takes months to get there. And you're traveling through difficult terrain and, alone in the wilderness and beasts and trying to sleep at nighttime. It's a whole journey. And his community gave him a bunch of questions. When you go to Medina, make sure you're going to meet this great scholar named Malik bin Anas. Ask him the questions. This man traveled the whole distance, gets to Medina, finally finds time with Imam Malik, sits down with him and asks him. And 90% of the questions, Imam Malik doesn't know the answer. He keeps saying, La adri, la adri, la adri. I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And mind you, Imam Malik, when he would teach, he always had like a large gathering around him. So there's like a huge gathering of people, and a man's asking him questions in front of everybody. He says, I don't know, I don't know. Eventually the man's like, I traveled this whole distance. Oh, Imam, when I go back, my people were like, expecting that I'm going to have the answers. What do I say to them? He said, tell them that Imam Malik said he doesn't know. What else? Do you get that? Now, people ask questions. And sometimes you don't know. That's just, it's okay. And sometimes, and so we need to be more comfortable just saying, I don't know. It's a great question. That's something that sounds really interesting. I'm not sure about it. I can try to find out for you. Right? And if we have that attitude, subhanAllah, we will save ourselves from being sinful, for speaking on stuff we don't know. But two, also we'll develop humility. Right? You know it's actually a very scary thing, and I've seen this. I've seen people grow up constantly feeling like they have to have an opinion lest they look like they're not very educated. The worst thing is everybody around them knows they're making it up, but no one wants to say it, and that individual keeps going on, completely winging it, like just straight out of left field. And everyone knows. We don't want to be that person, right? Where we're sitting there, we haven't learned to say, I don't know. So we make something up, and everyone knows we made it up, but they all kind of go, oh, good point, achibat. And you're like, it's not an achibat at all. That was terrible. But no one wants to say it. Do you get it? And so from a young age, may Allah give us tawfiq to be people that know our limits and that we educate. And some of you are thinking like, some people on TikTok need to hear this. Yeah, they definitely need to hear this. SubhanAllah. Don't take your religion from TikTok, yo. Right? Like, I know some of us, we take our medication from TikTok, right? Like I did my research, right? I watched a TikTok. But guys, really, you cannot play with something like religion with TikTok. Serious. It's not how you learn religion. You can get some inspiration, maybe. Maybe at best, you can feel a little inspiration to like, I got to do better. Sure. But like my understanding of like what God wants from me to be taken from like a 10-second clip of somebody who's just merely well-spoken and knows how to edit. Watched a few videos on CapCut, and boom, mashallah, your deen is being shaped by that. Don't do that. That's all I would say. Please don't do that. Right? We have to be careful. We have to be really careful with how we learn our religion, and whether or not the people that we're asking really have the humility to say, I don't know, if they don't know. And so these people don't have that. So they're just like, yeah, this is just like, you're just seeing stuff. It's not that important. And for such nonsense, we don't know the interpretations. Now, the winemaker, the wine pourer, he's standing nearby in the gathering. So he hears dreams, interpretation. Hey, I still remember a guy who interpreted my dream and told me that I would be where I am today. So finally, the surviving ex-prisoner remembered Joseph after a long time. Some scholars mention that in this is a reminder That you know the good that you do in your life, don't ever think that it's permanently gone. The way that Allah can bring it back to you in your very life is incredible. Any of you ever had that? Where, you might have done something good just to be good, right? Like, hey, like I want to help this person out. I want to support that person. And like down the line, I think someone was telling me a story about like, they just helped out this older lady in the supermarket, and then later on met them at like a family function, and then it's like, oh, there's that nice person who helped me, and then ended up marrying their child. Like, that's the connection. Everyone's like, we're going to the supermarket tomorrow, right? Looking for some old ladies. No, that's not the lesson here. The lesson is that you can do good in life and think like, I just did it and that's that. But you don't know the difference it makes in people's life and how it can come back. The Prophet Yusuf, when he gave them the interpretation, he didn't give them the interpretation on the condition that they would remember him, did he? He's gonna do this twice now. When he was in prison and they came to him, he just invited them to Allah. That's all he said. Listen to me, I'm going to invite you to Allah. After that, I'll tell you the interpretation. But he didn't tell them, hey, listen, I'll tell you the interpretation on the condition that when you get out, you got to help me. He didn't do that. Gave them the interpretation. And as they're leaving, he told the one, he said, hey, listen, when you're leaving, just make sure to remember me. And that man, in this moment, after so long, remembers him. After a long time, Allah says, بَعْدَ أُمَّةٍ. He tells them, hey, guys, guess what, guys? I'll tell you the interpretation. I know someone. Just let me go to prison. Let me go and see Yusuf. Now, some scholars talk about why is it that the king himself never thought about Yusuf. And they say that after such a long time had passed, pretty much many of them had forgotten about Yusuf. They kind of forgot that they put him there. Now this man comes, and subhanAllah, how do you go back? Right? How do you show up at that prison cell after like 7 years and go, hey, it's me? Like, how do you do that? And he not only did that, he shows up and what does he say? Yusuf, O man of truth, right? Can you interpret for us? Subhanallah, look what he says here. Aftina fi sab'i baqaratin siman. Interpret for us the dream of 7 fat cows eaten up by 7 skinny ones and 7 green ears of grain and 7 others dry. Why? So that I can go back to the people and let them know. Allahu Akbar. He's about to take credit for it. Incredible. He says it straight up. Give me the interpretation. I'm going to go let people know. And people are going to think I'm a genius. Right? SubhanAllah. When people... He didn't even say it's the dream of the king. Do you notice that? He didn't say, interpret for us the dream of the king. He just gave a generic dream. Now, the Prophet Yusuf, he has a lot of leverage here now, doesn't he? Think about it from a power dynamics perspective. He's in prison. This man is coming, needs help interpreting a dream. What's the first thing you could do? Say, brother, listen. 7 years ago, I gave you the interpretation. You never remembered nothing. So today, you want that interpretation? You better go, talk about me, mention me, and then we'll talk. No? Isn't that what you could do? I'm not saying a word until you go have a word with your king. No, the Prophet Yusuf displayed prophetic spirit. He gave. Why do you think he told them without even asking? The next verse, in the next few verses, the Prophet Yusuf gives them the full interpretation. Look at this. First he says, Joseph replied, you will plant grain for 7 consecutive years, leaving in the ear whatever you will harvest except for the little you eat. Meaning, You will put a lot of effort into planting, and you'll only eat a very little. Why? Because after that will come 7 years of great hardship. That whatever you've saved, you'll end up consuming it, or rather, it will destroy what you've saved, except a little that you will store. And then after that will come a year in which people will receive abundant rain, and they will press oil and wine. He not only, number one, he not only gives them the entire interpretation, he even gives them the solution to the problem. They didn't even ask for the solution. What should we do? He said, here's the problem. Here's what's going to happen. It won't be good. Here's the solution. Why did he do that? Why did he give up all his leverage? What are some reasons you think? Yeah. Beautiful. The ability to interpret was from Allah. So he didn't see it as a personal feat. He saw it as a gift from Allah. And you got to share those gifts. Beautiful. SubhanAllah. Yeah, this time he didn't even ask the man, go remember me, you know? He's like, I'm just going to tell you the interpretation. After that, you do what you want. Right. Yeah, he learned his lesson. Yeah. Right. This is beautiful. This is what some mention. That in bargaining and like saying, listen, I'm not going to tell you the interpretation until you get me out of here, that would be prioritizing himself. But in giving the interpretation, who was he prioritizing? The people of Egypt. See, that's prophetic spirit. That the people will come even before yourself. Do you see that? That the people's well-being is more important to the Prophet Yusuf than his own well-being. He's willing to stay in prison. SubhanAllah. He tells this man, right? Here's the answer. And he gives him all the advice about what will happen. Ultimately, he says, eventually a year will come in which people will receive abundant rain. وَفِيهِ يَعْصِرُونَ, and they will press juice in it. What does that mean? That means that the crops will be so abundant that you'll be able to make juice, like olive oil. You'll be able to make wine. You can only do that when you have such an abundance, right? Like you have enough grapes to eat now. Everyone has grapes in the city, and you're like, okay, what do we do with the rest of these grapes? It's okay, fine, let's make some wine, right? Which goes to show how much abundance there would be. The Prophet Yusuf is someone who demonstrates immense patience, but also selflessness. So now, obviously, they come back and they give the king this interpretation, and he's obviously overjoyed. Wow, this is incredible. I don't understand that. None of the people in my court understood this. So he says to them, bring him to me. And so the messenger comes to him, and look at the Prophet Yusuf's response. Strategy, right? He says, go back to your master and ask him about the case of the women who cut their hands. He says, what? Go back and ask your master about that case. You know what cases go cold? There's investigation, and it just dies out. No one's looking into it anymore. Go bring up that old case. There was this time where these women, they cut their hands when they were looking at this man. What happened? Go find out. What's going on with that? Was the man even guilty? The Prophet ﷺ, in one narration speaking about this, he said, may Allah have mercy on the Prophet Yusuf. He said, if I had been in his shoes, I probably would have rushed out of the prison given the opportunity. But the Prophet Yusuf says, no, I'm not coming with you. I'm staying right here in prison. Go ask your master about what happened with those women. Some of the commentators mentioned, he didn't say, go ask the master, your king. Go ask him about his wife. Didn't say that. Because that would have been offensive. He said, ask him about all those women. Right? He understood how to navigate these conversations. Why do you think he didn't exit the prison right away? Why not? Why was he like, I'm not leaving. I'm going to stay here until this gets solved. Why? Yeah. Beautiful. Absolutely. He didn't want that people think, oh, he helped them out. That's why they let him out. Meaning what? Oh, he's guilty, but they gave him a special favor because he helped them out. He didn't want that. He wanted his reputation intact. He wanted to come out such that all would know that he was truly innocent of all the charges made against him. And that's why he said, I'm not leaving here on your terms. I will leave on my terms. And my terms are that the truth be made apparent. I am not guilty. And so he stayed. And he trusted who? He said, my Lord has knowledge of their cunning, of their planning and plotting. We'll stop here, inshallah, and we'll continue from the next verse next week. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the understanding of the deep lessons contained in this chapter. May He enable us to live our lives in ways that reflect that prophetic spirit of patience and selflessness. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.